So what we're going to be doing in this video is we're actually going to be using the Azure AI Studio. I'm actually going to um, click and set up as favorites, which will make them show up here, if you recall, both the AI Studio and AI services, um, because they are kind of working together to deliver an overall solution for you. Now, to be clear, AI Studio is not a service. The actual service is the Azure AI service. But they do provide you with a connector to AI Studio through here, where you can sort of configure some things if you so desire. So very quickly now, we're going to actually go into the AI services, and we're going to start by creating an AI service. You can see I have some already created. I'm going to put it into my um, demonstrations resource group. I'm actually going to use the West region, and let's give it a name here. Think of what to call it. So that's not going to work because that's already been used. And remember, of course, that the name that you provide here corresponds to a subdomain, just like app services or many of the things that you create inside of Azure. They're all URL based, so you can access them via URL at the end of the day. So it's important that you pick a name that is unique. Now, I want to say good or bad thing about this is that they're not only are they unique to you, they are unique to everybody, right? So it has to be it's a website, right? So it's a web address, so it has to be totally unique. And because of that, you have to be careful what name you provide here. So I'm gonna try to see what names I have or haven't used. I think that might work. Let's see, does it? Yes, it actually does. But let's make it a little bit more unique so that there's no confusion. There we go. So we now have that created. So when we click next, we're now going to go to the network feature. And as you recall, in the statement I previously made, one of the big distinctions between going directly to OpenAI, which you can go to ChatGPT and you can create an account, and it has an API that you can work with. It's a web-based API, but obviously when you're using that, that's totally public, and you're using the same data set that everybody else is using. With this, you're able to create an AI that is private to you, and that only your resources can access. And you can actually make this AI also be able to only access resources inside of your network. So you have a lot more flexibility here than you do by just using OpenAI. And when I say a lot more flexibility, I mean, managed identities, storage accounts, key vaults, everything that you're used to using Azure to control, basically all the different kinds of resources and the way you can essentially control resources in Azure. You can essentially do it when you're using Azure AI services. So for now, we're going to just use a public network, and that's pretty much it. And once it's all set up, you can actually click create, and that'll configure it. So now that that's set up, the next thing that you need to do is create an AI hub. So as it stands, basically, you're going to have your AI service, and an AI service can have one to many AI hubs, and each hub can also have n number of AI projects. And that's how they all get created. And then within your project, this is where you would add, select the model that you want to use. This is where you'd have your playgrounds and whatnot, right? And when you're coding, you're going to code against the AI service, which is going to provide you things like the key and the URL. And but you're also going to take that model and supply it here, model, and then between the three of them, this will uniquely identify the resource that you're going to be connecting to, and then you can basically write your code that points to that and uses that to do whatever you want it to do. That's the general flow. So we're now going to create an AI hub. So again, you select the resource group that you want it to be in. We're going to use um, our demonstration resource group. We're also picking the West region as well. And then you'd obviously have to provide a name for the hub. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice as you're creating that name is that it's actually asking you, hey, what AI service do I want to connect to? So, in reality, you don't have to start from the AI service. I like to start from the AI service because it basically just allows me to logically think of it in that structure. But you can create a hub first. In fact, from the UI of Azure AI Studio, you're only going to have the ability to create hubs. And then when you create that hub, you'll have the choice if you want to create a new one, you click that, and that'll allow you to basically give it whatever name you want. Otherwise, it'll generate a name for you. If you've ever done anything with Azure SQL, it's sort of like a similar way that it's done. You're basically working on the database, and behind the scenes, it's creating the actual database server. You don't necessarily have to think about it from the server perspective. There are some things you're gonna do that would be on the server side, meaning that you configure it at the server level to affect all the databases that point to that server. But for the most part, you can work on it directly at that database level. So this follows that general pattern. So in this case, we already have a service created. So I'm just going to select the service that we just created, which is a ThinkMind AI demos. And then we can go on to storage. And here you can see that you need to pick a storage account that you wanted to connect to, and you need to pick a key vault that you want to connect to. You'll also notice that over here, I can select that I want to use App Insights, right? So I can actually gather metrics about the AI Hub, and you can also specify a container registry that you want to use. Essentially, the way AI services or AI Studio uses the container registry is that it's used to train models, and it's used for deployments. Basically, models and deployments can be trained using the container registry. You also have the option to pick your networking here. This is distinct from the networking that you picked at the AI service level. That would encompass all hubs that are inside of the AI service, almost like a backing rule that applies to all of them. You can be more specific or modify them for each hub here. And then here we can specify our encryption. One thing to note here, as you can see, is that the choice that you make as it relates to encryption is one that's made during configuration. You cannot change it after the fact, so be mindful of that. Identity, as we discussed previously, can be configured here. In this case, you'll notice that it's grayed out. It's grayed out because we are creating the key vault, the container registry, and the storage account as we're creating the resource. If these things were already created, if you were using an existing one, then you would have the option to choose between system assigned or user assigned. The identity piece is pretty, even though it's simple, it's somewhat sophisticated in terms of like why you decide one versus the other and what the far-reaching impacts of making a decision one way or the other might be. So I would recommend, if you were doing something like this, to check with your security office to figure out what makes the most sense for you in your enterprise. You also have a choice here to decide between what kind of access you want to your storage account. This is another example where there might be some far-reaching impact to doing one versus another. So, for example, credential based is the default way. When you're using the identity based, you do have to have a certain role um, available for that identity that you're using. So again, be mindful of that. Check with security. These are decisions that you're going to have to make at a much higher level if you're within an enterprise. But if you're building something very, very simple, very, very straightforward, my advice would be to keep these things as simple as possible. And that's basically it. We're going to use identity based here for us. Again, buyer beware, pick the one that makes the most sense for you. And once we are done with the configuration, we basically create the AI hub. All right, so now that we've created the resource, let's go ahead and go into Azure AI Services and let's actually click on that resource and go down the path of all the settings that you can use to configure it in one form or another. So you would, of course, already be familiar with changing the activity log or viewing it. You would be familiar with access control, managing access control to that resource. You know you can add and delete tags, and you know you can diagnose and solve problems. Those are the key things that you're going to see across pretty much all the Azure resources. Some cool new things that Microsoft has done on the portal is that they've added this collapsible categorization of the various settings associated with the resource. And you're seeing it here with the keys and endpoints. So basically, as you can see, under security, you have some stuff. Under monitoring, you have some stuff. And you can use this to quickly collapse the list to basically get to the items that you want to use. More important than that, though, is this ability for you to specify a favorite. So when I click and select on that star, what is going to happen is it's going to create a new category above all the other categorizations. So right below diagnose and solve problems, but right above everything else, called favorites. And in here, you can plug any of the settings that you're interested in into that area to make it very easy for you to get to settings associated with your resource and properties that are very common that you're always using or always having to look up. That's been a problem in the portal, having to scroll up and down to find things. And I know they have the search up here, right? But really, that's not necessarily the most ideal way. I like that they've added this capability. But getting back to what we're doing, so you can see in here that if you go to keys and endpoints, this is where you have the actual URL for your resource. And here is basically that main domain that everything is subdomained off of. So openai.azure.com is always going to be there. And just like app services with the Azure websites.net, whatever subdomain that you provide is going to have to be a subdomain that is unique, right? So you can't use anybody else's subdomain. What I would love to happen one day is if for each subscription, a unique ID is specified, and maybe even use a subscription ID, but use some kind of unique ID that you can use to tag your subscription. And then everything you create inside of that is unique to that subscription. That would just be a great way to solve this problem where you're constantly having to think of names and these things get all crazy long or whatever. So Microsoft, please, please add this at some point in the future. So beyond the keys and endpoints, we also have our encryption, which we can modify. We can look at our pricing tiers. Basically, right now, there's just standard S0. You can make some, let me quickly, there you go. Let me add that favorite. I forgot to do that. So as you can see, I've now added the favorites and you can see it's come up there. So if this was something I'm always going to use, and yes, it is something in this case that we're always going to be using, just add it as a favorite and it's going to save to your profile. You're all set. Next time we come back, that's going to be there. So back to what we're doing. Let's go down to networking. And you can see you can again change the stuff as needed. We can add private endpoints. Pretty much, we have, it functions like whatever else. Again, identity, we have the ability to um, modify the identity. Cost analysis, this is just analyzing, it's self explanatory, the cost. Properties we don't talk about, this general properties. And then locks, we've discussed ad nauseum in my previous videos. It's a way for you to lock the resource so it can't be changed by someone else using the portal. Defender for Cloud, there's not much to talk about here. This is security related stuff. Again, look at security. You're typically not going to be touching this stuff if you're not a security architect or a security engineer of some kind. And you typically will, be looking to somebody from a security perspective to go in and configure these as needed. I would not recommend doing this yourself if you don't have any kind of formal expertise in the area. And then beyond that, we have the general monitoring stack with our alerts that you can create based on things that happen from a monitoring perspective. We have our metrics that we can look at. Here you can see these are very important because, again, remember that when you're talking about AI, you're paying for tokens. So it's very, very important to get a sense of, first of all, how many requests are you getting? How many tokens are associated with it, and all the various metrics that might be tied to that. How long is it taking to respond to a request? All very important metrics to gather. You can also do any kinds of diagnostic settings here. So adding diagnostics, we can look at our logs. As you see that a log analytics workspace has been created for this resource. And then going into automation, we've looked at this again before. This pretty much every resource for now has this thing about being able to get a bill, at once a month, and that's essentially the primary automation task that's available to us. Right. So here, monthly cost, sending a monthly cost to someone. And then we can, of course, export the template. And this will export the ARM template so that you can incorporate it into your overall IAC scripts. So now that we've looked at that, let's go over and let's look at AI Studio. So let's actually go into the demo hub and let's see what we got here. So we go into our projects. And as you can see, there's no project I've added as a favorite. Notice that, remember I said that there were all these here, but because their events are a thing for the AI Hub, that's also been added. Now, note, of course, that the events that you set up here are not typical events for, let's say, things happening inside of the applications that you build. These are events that are going to be triggered for things like a model being registered, a model being deployed, a run of a model completing, the run status changing. So these are events associated with the resource, not events associated with things that the resource is doing, like the application level things. So just keep that in mind. So projects basically at this point don't have anything because we haven't created a project yet. Going into networking, it will look very similar to any other resource that allows for you to control the networking associated with it. So you can enable, disable, you can pick the networks, you can create private endpoints. You can also manage the outbound access. So basically, this is what we already looked at the workspace level, which is you can disable it, you can allow internet outbound, you can allow only approved outbound. Think of it like a firewall, right? So we looked at that already when we looked at the service itself, and then actually when we were creating the hub, remember we had that place where we can actually pick between disable, allow internet, and whatnot. So this is another place that you can add configurations to that. Encryption is the same as before. You'll note here that we cannot change the encryption as discussed. We're basically stuck with whatever it is that we picked before. The properties, the locks, nothing new there. Alerts and all that, nothing new. Gives a link of what you can do from an automation perspective with CLI. So, these are the same metrics that we've been looking at before. But in this case, you'll see that this is now not associated with calling the service, but more associated with basically behaviors that happen inside of your hub, right? So when models are deployed, when they're not deployed, that kind of thing. If there's any failures, that's what this is tied to. Nothing new in the logs and the diagnostic settings. We already looked at CLI, and that's basically it. So now that we've looked at everything, let's go ahead and let's launch the AI Studio so you can see how that actually looks and how it works. So here we have it, pretty straightforward. Again, this we're in a hub right now, and so you're going to be looking at projects. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a project. We're just going to call it project one. Let's create that. All right, so now we have our project created. So let's just quickly go back. All right, so we're right back at the portal, looking at the hubs. So if we look here, we should see, right, that our project has now been created. That is the project that we just recently created. So let's click into it and let's see what the configuration looks like here. And as you can see, there's not much in the project because once you really get down to the project, pretty much everything that you're doing happens in the AI Studio. So I'm going to just launch AI Studio from there. And now that I refresh it, you can see that the project has been created. And if I were to go down to the hub itself and click on the project as well, you should also see that the AI Studio is created. As a matter of fact, if I create a new project from there, it's just going to bring me into AI Studio. So really, when it gets down to the project level, you're going to be doing all your work from AI Studio. So before we get started, let's quickly take a look at what's happening at the highest level. This is the root level of Azure AI Studio. This is not a service. This is not connected to your actual service. This is more just what am I looking at for Azure OpenAI Studio for my subscription, right? So you can think about it. Really, I can't even say subscription. It's just for me, for my profile, what does AI look like for me? What have I been working on? You can see that basically, that's a resource we haven't talked about. Really, this is the only one that we just created. These two were previously created. They're not related to this AI service, and they're also not related to anything associated with what we're doing here, right? So the first thing you'll notice that in here we can actually create hubs ourselves, and we can actually see pretty much everything that we've been working on related to AI. So what else? We can look at our model catalog. So this is basically all the models that we have associated with Microsoft. So we got everything. We got Meta, we got Phi, we got GPT 3.5, got GPT 4, we got the whole thing. We can also look at any benchmarks associated with the model, right? So this is really which are the best ones, which are the worst ones, which are the most performance, which are not the most performance. It gives a score associated with all of them. That's great. We also have a list of pre-sample prompts, right? So prompts are, you can think of it as an AI. It's not an AI model. The model's already created. A prompt is really just I guess the application that's going to be created that's tailored to a specific scenario, right? So when you use that prompt, it's going to be tied to that given scenario. In this case, we're going to be creating a couple of prompts. We're going to create one that we can use to determine who the best basketball player that's ever lived is. And we're going to be creating another one that we can use to find childcare in the state of Connecticut. So those are two examples of prompts that one is more generic and just can just use the generic data coming from ChatGPT. The other is very specific to Connecticut. That data is not going to be available on ChatGPT. So we have to find some way to augment our AI with that data using some techniques. And we'll talk about how we're going to do that when we get to those videos. And then, of course, we can look at the Azure OpenAI services that we have in place. One of them is in East, the other is in West. We have our playgrounds. We can try things out. And here's all our AI services, which we'll talk more at length when we get into more deeper conversations regarding this. Once again, here are the resources and keys. And then finally, here's some quotas that are associated with our specific account or tenant. So now back here, let's quickly go and let's configure this to start working. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to need to pick a deployment. A deployment selects a model and deploys a model into your environment so you can use it. And what I've just shown you quickly is the data piece and indexes. We looked at that in the last video. If you recall, we used data and indexes to point to a storage location that had our own custom data. And then we basically, when we asked questions, it used our custom data as opposed to using whatever was available in the public ChatGPT. In this case, we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be using deployments. And we just click on a base model for us to start from. And of course, there's a lot to choose from, but in this case, we're just going to use GPT-4o. I'm going to leave everything as it stands and just click on deploy. And now that is fully deployed and ready to go. So now that we have something deployed, we can now go over to the playground and we can start messing around with it. So we're going to quickly create a system message. This is the same system message and really the same UI that we used in our last video on AI when we created it. Pretty much nothing different. Up here, you can see that we're using the deployment that we just created. If we create multiple deployments, then we can pick and choose the one we want to use. And you can actually have multiple deployments inside of the same project. And when you're calling it, you just, swap one deployment from another. So if you're doing multiple different things, it's fine. So I'm just going to modify the code here to just say the price of tea in Nigeria is $10. So you're an AI system that helps people find information about your products. You know that the price of tea in Nigeria, spell Nigeria, right, is $10. Okay, so we're going to apply those changes. When I want to see that again. And then I can now go over to the other section and I can just ask a simple question. How much does tea cost? And you can see that it responds, the price of tea in Nigeria is $10. If you need more information or have any questions, feel free to ask. So in this video, you learned about AI services, you learned about AI hubs, you learned about the Azure AI Studio where it consolidates everything together. We create a project and we then added a deployment into that project of GPT 4.0. In coming videos, we're now going to use that environment that we've set up where we did do a test of the price of tea in Nigeria, where we are now going to start slinging code and using this AI environment that we've created to actually do the coding in C#. Stay tuned for more videos. Thank you.